Hey everyone, welcome to Geeksvana Live. Thank you very much for joining us on this this Wednesday evening here in the UK. We've got an interesting topic to discuss this evening because it has a lot of international connotations to it and angles to it, but we are going to be talking very specifically about UK remote ID this evening. Some of the information that I have on it, we're going to look into the background of it, also look at where it fits in terms of the CAA plans for the modernisation of airspace and that type of thing. So we're going to be talking about lots of interesting facts and things, and wave my hands in the air because Matt Williams is on tonight, and he's obviously inspiring me to wave my hands in the air. I'll try and keep them down. There should only be one person with their hands waving in the air per show. I think we should have that official limit. But yeah, so tonight we're going to be talking about that. Lots of facts, but we're also going to be giving you our opinions as well and having a discussion about different aspects of it, which some of the things that perhaps the American system has taught us about and other things like that. But thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. I really do appreciate it. It's great to see so many people in wanting to talk about this particular subject. XJet, I love your message. I like the way Sean labels his doors so he doesn't get lost. Do you know that actually does work when I give people instructions for coming in and where we're working in a particular day. We do use studio numbers, but you'd think with just 2 rooms we really wouldn't get lost, but there we go. So tonight, as I say, we're going to be discussing the remote ID here in the UK. We're going to bring you what the CAA are telling us about this at the moment. We're going to talk about the issues that the US are having, the FAA version of it, and that type of thing as well. So without further ado, I'm going to bring in my fellow panel member, our senior editor of the channel. Ooh, it's Matt Williams. How are you, sir?
Senior editor.
Yeah, I'm good.
I'm all right, thank you, mate. How are you? Evening, everyone. Evening, chat.
There we go.
Blow it up.
Good to see you, sir, for your second show in fairly quick succession. I think we killed Graham off on the last one. I think we scared him away a little bit, but he'll be back very, very soon. He's got plenty of. It's interesting actually because the content you and Graham are bringing to the channel is obviously something we're going to allow to grow organically and find its own voice, which is very exciting. And I think actually Graham might end up being a ranter. I thought it would be all sort of facts and figures and analysis, but we've got quite a few rants coming up. So I think the CAA should be hiding behind their desks for the next few weeks once Graham starts his role, as it were. Frankly, but I'm excited about that. But what have you been up to?
Nice.
Since we last saw you?
It's it's been a really busy few days, to be honest. We've had a bunch of stuff going on over at the Drone Mentor Academy, and diving into that, and a couple of bits from the CAA as well that I think have been going on in the background that we will be coming out, I think, to the general public over the next few days. For a change, we've been told about some of the bits and pieces. That's it. A day or two ahead, I think, more so that we have prepared. But it's nothing game changing that we've been given so far. It's just for us to change some training bits and pieces. No gossip,
it's
I'm
nothing
afraid.
Interesting for the open categories for the hobby flyers watching this evening and that type of thing. It's so yes, it will be interesting though, certainly. But yes, so Drone Mentor, you've been making some more content for that, having some more mentoring sessions and that type of thing.
That's it, yeah. So it's been packed out with people doing one-to-one training sessions, and we've had loads of people join the academy over the last few days because the next live training session that we run on the first Monday of every month is next Monday. So getting ready for that. So we'll have a couple hundred people, I think, this time joining us live for that, which is
very
awesome.
Exciting.
And then looking after our Drone Business Secrets course students who get a lot more time with me and each other. They've been going along in the background, coming to the final week of their course as well. So, and that's quite an intense one, to be honest. And then we have 6 weeks off.
Wow.
And then we go again. So
very cool.
The next group.
So, you have I've just put the Drone Mentor link in the chat because you've very kindly extended the offer to Geeksvana viewers to save more than 60% off becoming a student of the Drone Mentor. Do you call them students? Do you call people that enroll? Do they have a term yet?
So they're they don't know. So we have been. If anyone's got any ideas that they can put in the chat that are clean and allowable.
That's it now. That's it now.
Oh, mate. So I mentioned it once, right, on a live stream, and they came up with this hashtag, which for some reason was drone boners, and I was like, oh my god, what? So
did you just say drone boners on my channel? Sorry, but yes, okay, fair enough.
Yeah. Drone bonus. Yeah, Luke Smith. It was Luke Smith who's in the chat right now.
And he's just
who
hashtagged
actually
it as
came up
well.
with it with one of the other guys, and he's just put it
Luke,
in. Yeah,
Luke,
victims. That's what we call them.
It's all your fault. It is all your fault, Luke. And yeah. Terrible, but hey, there are worse things to be called, frankly, yes, we get called them constantly, but there we go. Right, so we're going to be talking about this evening about remote ID, and specifically remote ID here in the UK. It's been a bit of a period recently where we've not we haven't been able to ignore remote ID in the UK, because it's always been something that's been discussed. In fact, electronic conspicuity was something in the EASA rules, and it was something that was sort of put to one side. I suppose it was one of the cans that was kicked down the street a little bit, I suppose. It is how it felt, but it is something which is still certainly coming up. Edinburgh Drone Company Evening All came in right at Boner. Yes. It's probably going to go downhill from there, Ross. To be honest with you, if it is Ross that's typing there. And yeah, it's an interesting topic, because it's something which has kind of crashed into the UK scene again, because of course we had something of a controversial article or two floating around, very aggressive articles, talking about number plates and for your drone and that type of thing, etc. But it's something which I think it isn't really talked about too much, is it, really, either within the hobby or within the industry here in the UK at the moment, in terms of the operators, the people actually flying the drones. It's not something that's really coming up on our sort of chats at the moment.
No, it's not, and I don't think that's a bad thing necessarily, personally, but I think get right the things that we need to get right before we start pushing other things. That's my opinion, right? Like get all of your kind of ducks in a row and get used to what's going on now before we start to then look to doing that. And I think it's one of those things, right? It's inevitable. It's probably something that is going to come in, particularly for the larger stuff. I would imagine, along with other electronic conspicuity measures. Because we need that in the larger side of things.
And I think the concept of remote ID is something that we need to stay not open to in terms of accepting, because if people are against it, that's they are more than I'm more than happy with that. But everyone has their views. But being open in terms of what the concept could actually be, because it won't necessarily be the same system as the States. It won't necessarily be what we all think remote ID is going to be. So certainly over in the US, there's been a lot of animosity towards it. There's been a lot of people that have felt they're just not going to comply, and I've always seen compliance as one of those key issues, both from the user and manufacturer point of view, because now that in the US you have the manufacturers that have to comply, you've got people like Rotor Riot actually putting on the bottom of their product pages, this is not intended for flight within the US. So if you do flight within the US, you need to make your own plans for it, etc., and that type of thing. So it seems like there's going to be a lot of compliance issues that they're going to have there. Certainly one of our biggest videos last year on the channel, Full Stop, was actually one talking about asking people whether or not they're going to comply. And of course, it's a bit of an echo chamber when you put a video up saying, are you going to comply? Of course, you're going to have more people saying no than yes anyway. But there really was a very, very high percentage of people expressing that it was not something in the US because of course they have their final rule there, so they know the type of remote ID that they're going to be using. It is compliance, I think, both for manufacturer and user, I think is going to be a key issue, frankly. So it is going to be an interesting one. So first of all, I wanted to discuss where this has sort of come up again here in the UK publicly. As I say, it's been talked about off air. It's been something that I've had a few conversations with people about, but it was something that was being worked on, something that we don't really have much information on type of conversations, but let's have a theoretical conversation about remote ID. It was never really that serious. And then suddenly, of course, we start to get some fairly, I think I would call it aggressive headlines, shall we say, and most articles seem to have come off the back of this one in the Telegraph, which is talking about, as it says here, drone number plates to help tackle the Wild West in the sky. And their subline there is that concern is growing in government that the registration scheme for the UK's 300,000 drone users is currently too hard to enforce, which I don't know how many drone operators, both hobby and professional, you could annoy in 2 sentences if you tried. I suppose Jeremy Clarkson calling us all basically sex offenders might actually have got close to it, perhaps. Yeah, and again, of course, they use the obligatory random drone photo, which has nothing to do with anything that anyone is flying. Of course, it's a CG image of a non-existent drone. And the story itself talks about the fact that drones will be forced to have electronic number plates so they can be tracked by police and the security services under plans being drawn up by regulators and government. Drones would be equipped with remote ID technology, enabling their speed, location, height, user location, big one there, and takeoff point to be tracked. It comes as concern grows in government, this line again, that the registration scheme for the UK's 300,000 drone users lacks the technological backup for it to be properly enforced. One source compared the situation to the Wild West. I don't, I mean, hey, if that is how that source feels, then fine. But I'm not exactly sure. I would like, the reason they think it's this is because of X, Y, and Z. It's strange. With 900,000 commercial drone users alone predicted in the next 5 years, here comes those wonderful prediction numbers that are sort of picked out of nowhere, despite the fact that the number of commercial operators has nearly halved over the last 12 months. But okay, that I understand. Ministers want an aerial equivalent of the automatic number plate recognition network of cameras for cars, vans and lorries, which enables police and local authorities to identify good old law-breaking drivers. Now, I cannot even begin to tear apart that particular comparison from the point of view that we're talking about, cars that are attached to the ground that don't tend to go in the air too much unless you drive like Matt Williams. But unless you drive your car like an XREF fighter pilot, but there we go. And there is obviously an established network. There's an established system, and that system of tracking those cars has been developed over many, 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 many years, and the technology has grown around it as well. So I think that's an odd one. The United States has already legislated for such a system, which will go live in September this year. Which actually technically it's already live for the manufacturers, which will have drones will have to have a unique identifier that it is broadcasting along with the coordinates of its aerial position in real time, control station and takeoff point. The Civil Aviation Authority, the CAA, has commissioned Swiss firm Mozilla Consulting to develop a strategy for any future remote ID requirements for UK drone and remotely piloted services. It is understood officials are working towards a deadline of April 1st, 2026 to get a remote ID system running in the UK. Okay, good luck with that. The plans are due to be announced in March this year. The move comes as the government prepares to spend $8 million deploying anti-drone detectors around nuclear plants, transport hubs, oil rigs and other sensitive infrastructure across the UK to protect from aerial terrorist attacks. Now, I don't know about you, but of this entire article, the one thing that I think makes sense, the one thing that I think is good, is that last line. Frankly, that it's that they are protecting, because I've always felt that one of the ways to, if you're concerned about certain facilities, concerned about certain XYZ, it kind of doesn't really matter if you put an FRZ up around it. Yes, do it, because actually the law-abiding drone pilots and hobbyists, etc., will follow it and they will be careful. But there's always those that don't look, that say, oh, hey, if the DJI, I had a comment on one of my videos today, if the DJI drone allows me to take off, I'm fine. Basically, and it's like, okay, you're not, but okay. And of course, nefarious, the so-called bad actors who might be looking for information or to attack these kind of facilities. I've always felt that we should protect those facilities, and if they are going to be spending the $8 million deploying anti-drone detectors around nuclear plants, transport hubs, oil rigs, and other sensitive infrastructure, I think that's a good thing, don't you? I think that's actually one of the only lines of that report that I think is probably based completely in some kind of reasonable fact.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that for a very long time we've been aware of in terms of, particularly the military in the counter-terrorism side of things that I was exposed to for a while. how do you protect against someone who wants to do something with a drone to an infrastructure asset or an asset in general? We've got the physical protection in place in the ground in most places that are sensitive or need it. We've got air defense assets in place around certain things that need it, and we deployed those all over London, for example, during the Olympics in 2012. How do you do that against a drone? And this is the thing. I don't think remote ID actually forms part of that protective shield, right? Yes, sure, for people who are not acting nefariously, and I had this exact same conversation about full-size aircraft when we were part of the air defence plan for London for the 2012 Olympics. It was, look, the person who is coming in to try and do something horrible and nasty to a stadium with a Cessna full of fertiliser or explosive or whatever it might be, they're not going to take off and file a flight plan. They're not going to take off and tell people where they're going. They're not going to take off and leave their transponder on and be squawking mode Charlie or mode Sierra as it is now for a lot of aircraft. They're going to turn everything off. They're going to go as low as they can or as fast as they can or whatever they can do. And it's the same with the drone stuff, right? Like, someone with remote ID on their aircraft isn't going to be the problem. They're not going to be the person who causes a major issue.
No, I mean, there's always the argument that if you show the best way to put it, basically, if everybody that isn't nefarious, which is the absolute vast majority of us, of course, is flying with remote ID, then the ones that aren't are the ones that they can go and have a look at, and whether it's just someone not complying or whether it is someone nefarious, those become the red dots, as it were, to say, okay, that isn't transmitting what's going on there. Now, that, of course, is in some kind of strange dystopian future where when you go to the local park and there's 5 Mini 3s flying and someone flying a Phantom across the back of the park. And I have to say, I very actively look for other drone users. Most of the time, whether it's flying commercially or for hobby, I don't see other drone users. So I agree. It doesn't seem to necessarily be something which is completely practical, shall we say, in those terms. And it feels like I wouldn't necessarily point to any particular, say, oh, this particular report is coming from pressure from the CAA or from, evidently there are government sources because it's the Telegraph and they will check their stuff and know their stuff, but. And it is their Home Affairs editor and one of their Whitehall correspondents. So there's clearly people feeding this story. Clearly, people feeding hey, if you could get Wild West into the headline there and that type of thing, etc. You have to wonder, because it's a very, very specifically written article, which has then been picked up by so many other news agencies, and it just doesn't feel. It feels very anti-drone, and I've always said to people that, of course, in any government, in any infrastructure, there are always going to be people that are pro drones and people that are very much anti drones as well. And I think that's always one of the things that we have to be careful about. And that's one of the reasons why I personally follow the rules, etc., because I don't want to give people the reasons. I don't want to give the people who are anti drones and any kind of reasons to come after us even more. But that's just my personal opinion. We all fly, we all do what we choose to do 100%. Now, in terms of the CAA, because of course once I read that kind of article and the buzz started to happen around the story, as it were, which is exactly what they wanted when that story came out, of course, I did reach out to the CAA, and pretty much the response was that we don't really have too much to share. We don't really have too much to talk about, because in actual fact, it's not given that the UK will definitely implement remote ID. And actually, if they do implement it, what it will cover and what it will actually look like. They did tell me that the CAA have commissioned some very, very preliminary research as to what a UK system could look like, but it does not mean that it's a given. So no one knows yet. Now, I'm going to explain what that actually means, because we're going to break down a couple of the CAA bits and get a little bit technical during this show, but I will explain exactly what that means, what it could look like, and also look at some of the areas that the CAA are looking at. But first of all, let's take a look at the the press release, which was sent to me by the CAA, which is of the press release which was put out by the two companies who have been given the job of this initial research, and it's through Mozilla Consulting and Beringa, and an established couple of companies in terms of consulting, certainly. And as it says here, Mozilla Consulting teams up with Beringa for a UK remote ID strategy proposal for remotely piloted aircraft. Switzerland-based Mozilla Consulting has won a project in collaboration with Beringa to develop a strategy for any future remote ID requirement for the UK drone and remotely piloted services. The project's main goal is to support the UK Civil Aviation Authority in defining an approach for implementing any future remote ID solution that best serves all stakeholders involved, including users, citizens, law enforcement, and broader government stakeholders. Mozilla Consulting brings its global experience in aviation and drones, in particular from Switzerland. Its CEO, Lorenzo, successfully led the Swiss U-Space implementation program, which is interesting, with specific focus on setting up a partnership between government bodies and industry for remote ID solutions. And Lorenzo is quoted in the release as saying, the UK is a leading nation on drone development, and we're pleased to be part of the strategic process to continue this work. And then they talk about who their companies are and that type of thing. Now, when you do look across at our customers page, there is a lot of large companies. Lots of companies. We'll see Manor there, of course, who are the drone delivery company, currently very active in Ireland, although I think they're moving towards the America as well, on certainly trial-wise, etc. But Manor are probably running the closest thing to what we all imagine will be drone delivery in the future at the moment in those trials, and lots of Aircar and Skydio's there, etc. And of course the CAA, because of course they are clients for this report as well, and Wingcopter, etc. So it's an interesting choice. Obviously, it's one of those things where people are going to say, well, come on, these guys are in Switzerland. Why don't we get a British company? I've heard that said a lot in the last few days. Why don't these guys are going to? Many of their clients are drone delivery companies and that type of thing. So are they going to naturally move towards that side of thing and actually help them to open the airspace up? If you looked at that from a conspiracy theorist type of view, you could sort of say, hang on a minute, these guys are in bed, literally. Their customers are drone delivery companies who have a vested interest in opening up the skies. But of course, this is a research report from the CAA's point of view. This is a research report that they've instructed to give them information. So I suppose you would go to one of the industry experts. But yeah, it's interesting. But it seems to be it's this contract that has fueled the articles and fueled the recent interest. Now, whether or not that's off the back of these guys putting out lots of press about it, I don't know. But yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because how do you feel about who they chose?
As you say, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Who knows how or why these certain companies get chosen? They, in this case, I guess they, like you say, they have a lot of provenance, they have a lot of background. But for me, I think it's interesting that the CAA are looking so far ahead on this. There's got to have been, I mean, it's who's driving it and why is always the question, right? And so who is driving this, enforce change, as it may end up probably being towards having to have remote ID, and why are they bringing it in? What are the reasons behind it? And I suppose you can almost glean the reasons it's coming in, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on which side of the fence you're on, I guess. But for me, unfortunately, by the logo list that you just showed, right? Like the CAA there is almost a standout because that is the regulator all of a sudden using a consultancy who have and do work with all of the other people who almost need that to come in, so that, as you say, they can kind of sell off the airspace. Is that the driving reason? And if so, are we what impact is that going to have on
Exactly,
us as
and I think
operators?
that we at Geeksvana, we will be looking very hard at any reports which come out of that research and any recommendations that come out of that research in terms of looking really to ensure that it isn't. I mean, we're informed it isn't. This report isn't what's going to decide on what's happening, etc. But they're paying money for it. It's a substantial contract. They're going to want their money's worth from it, as it were. But we will be keeping an eye on that. Now, we also have situations such as, of course, our friends, I would like to call them, over at Altitude Angel, the chaps behind the Drone Assist app that many of us use, etc. And of course, they are looking at systems where different types of remote ID would potentially be used. Of course, Project Skyway is the trial at the moment, where essentially they have a corridor, although it's not specifically designed to be corridors in the long term, where they actually move the commercial traffic, the commercial BVLOS, like the large drone you can see on screen now, away from other air users, so away from manned aviation and that type of thing, along the trial corridor that they're having. Now, of course, in those sort of situations, remote ID, electronic conspicuity, wouldn't necessarily be needed on every single drone, on hobby drones and that type of thing, etc. And it's a very, very clever system, and it has a lot of government funding, it has a lot of government backing, and BT, as you can see on the right hand side there with their logo coming up as well, are working with Altitude Angel on this project in a big way as well. And it shows that we as a country, we are working on solutions that aren't necessarily everyone's going to have to start doing the US version, basically, that we're necessarily, and I'm not saying we are or we aren't, frankly, but that we're necessarily going down that road. So and then even with remote ID in itself, the implementation could be different as well. We could be looking at implementation that doesn't affect the hobby, that actually is commercial BVLOS and that type of thing. But to me, it isn't about safety. Personally, I don't think it's about safety. I can understand the security thing. So, because again, I don't want people using drones to do very, very bad things, but then I don't want people using anything to do very, very cars, vans, or anything else at all as well. So I have some, there's an allowance on the security side, as it were. But for me, it is about the future airspace. It is about the fact that they want to open up the lower airspace. They want to open that up and monetize it. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad word. I think that when you look at things like the CAA airspace modernization proposals and reports, I think that you can see that very, very clearly. So I'm going to bring that up next. And this is a back and forth report. This has been out on public consultation. This is a strategy that they are continually developing for modernising the airspace between 2023 and 2040. And as you can see, it includes everything from space travel. There you go, Matt. There's your next project. Can we get you on a rocket? Can we send Matt Williams to space?
That was always my plan, right? That was always my plan.
Indeed, which I can understand, as with many of you and your colleagues, it is 100%. And again, as you go down through the airspace on this front cover, you can see the jetliners and the private jets and the I won't call them hobbyists, but the general aviation light users. There's the military there, and down here somewhere, there is a drone. There's two drones. There you go. There's one drone which is greyed out. Oh, no, look, actually, there's lots of drones over the city there. That's a good sign, isn't it? There's lots of drones in this picture. I think that's a good sign. And of course, we have the flying taxis here, the air taxis in the front. They're even yellow, which is interesting. So, and this to me, even on the front cover, actually speaks more about why things like remote ID might happen, why there might be seen as a need to knowing everything that's going on in the lower airspace, because there are going to be so many more users very soon. And I think that's something with AAM and everything else. I think that's something which we've pretty much been ready for, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing, right? We have to look towards the future when it comes to aviation, right? And we have to understand that everything is in a place where it needs to modernize and the rules and regulations need to change. But again, the question comes back down to what is the what is the driver
Yeah.
behind remote ID? What is it? What is it there for? I mean, obviously there are people who are going to say, well, if you're not doing anything wrong, what does it matter? And do you know what? It matters because I don't want people to know where I'm stood with my controller while I'm flying my drone or flying my model plane. Like, I've done it. I've flown model planes. I mentioned before we started, I went out with my kids this weekend. We built a model plane over Christmas on the kitchen table, and we went out and flew it for the first time this weekend. And the kids' faces and the excitement that they had from watching something that they'd helped to build and go and fly was incredible, right? And you can't beat that, because that's two kids now that, you know, may get into a hobby which has, I mean, is amazing and gets them into aviation. They learn all about how everything works and how it's all linked together, how important it is to do all the checks and stuff before you go flying and check the wind, and there's so much around it. But we didn't have remote ID. I've never had it on any of my aircraft. We flew it in a field safely. No one died. We came back and we had a lovely time. And, you know, that, again, where's the evidence to say that this is a necessity? Certainly for certain types of air traffic. But here's the thing, right? Like, I can go and fly my Cessna 152.
A Cessna 152,
right?
yes.
I can go and hire one from the club.
We can dream. We can dream.
Yeah, that's
Come
it.
on.
I can go and hire a club aircraft one day, mate. You know, you can go and hire a Cessna from the club, and you can take it flying, and the requirements for that aircraft are significantly different than the requirements for an aircraft that weighs, you know, over 7.4 tons in the case of what I used to fly. And, you know, and as you go up, the requirements get stricter and they get more stringent, and the requirements for electronic conspicuity get greater, and quite rightly, because at that point, when you're into the kind of commercial air traffic side of things, or you're into the you know, carrying passengers, or you're into the dangerous goods side of things, yes, there is a requirement to increase the regulatory burden. There is a requirement for people to be able to see where you are if you want them to, and then be able to turn it off when you need to, right? But that isn't something that we need for what we have. Like, for going around.
Exactly. And I don't necessarily think, as I say, it concerns me greatly as far as who is carrying out this initial research, and as you say, where those instructions, where all that's coming. I don't necessarily think that we have to have remote ID as a blanket thing. I think that if we can use it to allow the BV loss and those type of things, then great. And I think there are other ways of doing things, be that through Project Skyway with Altitude Angel, that allows things to happen, and actually they move the commercial traffic out of the way, etc. Who knows? But I think there are other ways to do it. And if they don't take a significant bite from the cake that is remote ID in the United States at the moment, if they don't take a significant bite out of that data and see just how many people are not going to comply, and in fact how it's turning people off drone regulation completely in some cases because they feel like now they need to be under the radar completely, that to me kind of flies in the face of what you were trying to do, as in to be able to see more drones and that type of thing. And I'm aware that it's going to be built into DJI drones and Chinese drones and you know, Skydios and everything else like that will all have remote ID, standard remote ID built into it. But there's always spoofs. There's always ways around these things. You know, it's the same as saying, you know, my DJI drone's safe because it has the geo zones. Well, unfortunately, there are fairly cheap software programs that will help you remove that. So I refuse to believe that there won't be ways around these things. And in fact, I'm aware of people that talk about these things that are already happening. Just before we move on to the next part of this report that I want to talk about, which is a vision of airspace in the 2030s, proposed by the CAA, could you all do me a favour that watching the 174 wonderful people that are watching us drone on about drones? I could have put that better. Could you hit the like button? Can you ignore that in those last 5 seconds? Could you hit the like button? I would really appreciate it, as it really does help this live stream now and the replay to get recommended out to people. I really appreciate it. I can see the like number going up. Thank you guys. Yeah, really appreciate it.
It's going up. It's going up.
Within this report, this modernisation report, we have a chapter summary here, which is use cases, a vision of airspace in the 2030s. It's interesting. I would quite like to know what the CAA's vision is. So the chapter summary is the UK has a limited airspace volume in which to integrate current and new user ambitions. Integration of users in the lower volumes of airspace is a key challenge. It requires a significant change in the way we define and manage the operational use of such airspace. The changes required are wide-ranging and will require new and innovative methods of developing and deploying solutions. This chapter, which we're not going to read in full, don't worry, describes, this isn't Sean's bedtime story, describes 5 illustrative use cases relating to different aspects of modernisation. Those are the future structure of the airspace, air traffic service provision, remotely piloted aircraft systems, which of course is drones, RPAS, routine beyond visual line of sight operations. And when they're talking about that, they are talking about the drone inspections, for pipelines and electrical grids, etc. And of course, we would be talking there as well about the unmanned side of the larger AAM as well. Spacecraft and recreational general aviation flight between 2 small aerodromes in Class G airspace. And as it says here at the end of the chapter, there's an infographic giving a visualization, which is an interesting one to see, actually, which I will show in just a few minutes. But there's another paragraph from this report that I wanted to read, which was here, which is the future structure of airspace vision. So general, although autonomous operations in the UK airspace are a long-term aspiration, the UK will remain subject to ICAO airspace classifications. The aim is to develop UK airspace to allow wider access across all existing and future airspace structures. In the interim, we'll need to develop UK airspace such that it will, where possible, enable increased access for all existing and future airspace users. There will be an intent to remove long periods of segregation in favour of switching on airspace for a specific activity. For example, a controlled area zone around an aerodrome should only be active when the unit is providing an air traffic control service to IFR arriving and departing to enable equitable use of airspace when controlled airspace is not required. The airspace can be replaced by TMZ, RMZ, and there are some figures which we will come down to, which I found that quite interesting, Matt. I'm not sure about you, where the concept there that they're talking about is through the modernisation of the airspace is essentially having an active airspace. So the lower airspace, yes, is more used, but they're talking about even things like airport FRZs won't, so I suppose I would look at things like Scampton, which is, Monday to Friday, 10 till 5, whatever the hours are, or by NOTAM. And actually, we could see a situation where that changes in terms of if it's not active, it does drop out of it. So it would open up more airspace. So I can see the sense behind that kind of thing. On page 70, just down here, which will be good to get your opinion on a couple of these as well, actually, Matt, because obviously you are an aviator. An aviator.
Yes. I'm an aviator.
So I knew there's a reason why I brought you on tonight. So these are a couple of the figures which they're showing in terms of potential. And again, this is a discussion document. This is a consultation document which has gone backwards and forwards. There's been a consultation on this. There's even a document showing the responses and then a document showing their report to government based on all of this. So there's lots and lots of deep dive information for people that want to really get their hands dirty if you're slightly crazy like myself. And this shows a couple of things here where they have airspace restrictions on and off in terms of this sort of, non-segregated but allowing more airspace essentially. So on this first one here where the airspace restrictions are on, again you can see the column, the ever increasing CTR and the lower FRZ here in place around this aerodrome. You can see the drones all flying safely around it. You've also got something new here obviously, which is I presume that's the military dropping off people, or is that supposed to
could just be a normal
parachute aircraft, I suppose.
Parachute aircraft, I guess.
I suppose that could be a delivery drone dropping things off. I've
steady.
I've seen them.
Steady.
I've seen some plans which look less bizarre than that actually, more bizarre in fact than that actually. So and then once some of these activities aren't happening, you have a situation where the airspace restrictions are then switched off, where you've still got that protective bubble around the airport, which you'd expect. But then of course you've got much freer airspace for everybody to use and to enjoy around it. And again, there's Matt Williams there in his fighter jet flying past. And of course, there are lots of little drones in there as well. So that's an interesting concept, isn't it, in terms of having active. But to me, am I right that going from what we have now to that kind of active complexity, including drone users, including, hot air balloons, everything else, isn't that something that's going to be quite a complex thing to achieve?
Right. Am I allowed to, boss? Am I
I'm
allowed
going to
to
put the
swear
camera on
this,
you. So
right?
yes, we are
Can
more than 30 seconds in. You can say anything you like.
To be honest, I think it's kind of bullshit, right? We already have a system which effectively does that. There is, like, I'm not saying that the airspace isn't massively congested in the UK, and it is. We live in a small island here where we are, and because of that, the airspace structure is, I would say, necessarily complex and compacted, right? Because ultimately, there's not actually a lot of room when you are in when you're flying commercial air traffic or a military aircraft with lots of energy. You have to have a certain amount of room to be able to climb out along a departure lane and to arrive on an arrival lane, and the protection that you need around that to then get up into the airways. So that exists, it works, and as aircraft are getting higher, more increasing in performance, which I think is something that we're seeing happening, particularly since the airspace was originally constructed and designed. We do need to modernize, because now your A320, your EasyJet aircraft, your Ryanair, whatever it may be, you can take off and arrive in a much smaller volume of airspace. The problem is when something goes wrong and you then need that protected airspace to be able to operate within, without worrying about, because if I have an issue on an arrival and I have an engine issue or a gear malfunction, or I have to do a go around for some reason because I'm not stabilized on the approach, I don't want to have to be worrying about other people in the area around me, right? So one of the things that I think we could do in the UK in particular is to shrink down some of the protected airspace regions, and the CAA are doing that, and I know the military are looking at doing that as well. Although it is a land grab, actually, weirdly, the modernisation tends to be, we want more airspace, and because people want more airspace, right? Because it allows
the same as company departments that go to a budget thing every April. You're going in there knowing I probably don't need that, but actually I'm going to ask for more, because of course you do. It is, as you say, it is a land grab. It's an air grab as such.
Yeah, but the thing is, I think the difference now is that we have the technology to and the computing power, essentially, to be able to switch on and off things more accurately and sensibly. But I mean, airspace does increase and decrease. Military airfields go back down to their the ATZ at the weekends and things like that, and you get from a military perspective, you get the MATs, the military air traffic zone, and combined MATs and things like that, and they disappear at weekends. And so it does, for me, that diagram is something that it happens now. And here's the other big thing that something like that diagram, and I don't know whether this is, maybe it's oversimplified to make it easier to understand.
They are a couple of figures within a 118 page report.
Yeah.
So yes, it is a simplification of a process, but still, yeah.
But again, here's the thing with that, right? Have the people who've drawn those diagrams and are doing this, have they ever operated in that airspace, physically operated in the airspace properly? Because the other thing is, airfields, if they know that their airspace just disappears and collapses when they shut down, I would dare say that a lot of airfields will say, oh, no, we've got a movement tonight at 11 o'clock, just to protect their airspace so it's always there. Likewise, pilots flying IFR on instrument flight rules and things like that, you will tend to leave things set up, because then people who go backwards and forwards and do the same trips all the time and have it programmed in, they will operate in that.
But also when you then break that down in terms of active zones being active and not active, etc. It's tough enough to get most of the hobbyists to realise that there are temporary restrictions and to make it easy enough for them. I mean, if it wasn't for the Drone Assist app, where would we be as a hobby? Being able to know where temporary restrictions and things are at the moment, it's already difficult enough from bringing it back to our audience level, that it's it's already complex enough, and to then the thought of having sort of active, it excites me on one level, but on another level fills me with dread in terms of how that actually gets implemented. And this also brings me back to one of my little mini rants as well, and I don't need to necessarily swear for this one, but it does bleep me off to consider that we might be restricting hobby use, which is very, very important, and the professional operators, so commercial flyers who are, as Graham Degg will say, putting the food on their table with their drone flights, that those things that might be affected and are being affected for future flights, for something that, with all due respect, we don't know if it's going to work yet or not. We haven't seen an effective drone delivery platform which has got over all of the hurdles. And that's technology and that's time, and I understand that. And you also have to change things in enough time. You have to turn the ship, which airspace is a very big ship to turn, to bring these things on board and to allow that innovation, etc., and that type of thing. But I want to see more ring fencing of the existing users, be that general aviation or unmanned, uncrewed aviation, and drones, etc. I would like to see more protection from them. So yes, saying yes, this is what we're going to move to when these things start happening, and you can do these things on trial basis and that type, etc. But let's not keep affecting the core side of things, because they are knocking people's confidence when they're looking to invest in businesses and consumers looking to invest in the hobby and that type of thing as well.
But it's more than that as well, right? It's all of the sentiment that we're seeing at the moment and what we're seeing within the industry. For me, it comes back down to, again, me going flying with the kids at the weekend. It stops those kinds of people coming in, because we are making it now. It's becoming so complicated. It's becoming so complex that even, I mean, sometimes I don't even want to dive in and go and do any private pilot's license flying anymore, because I mean, I think I mentioned to you last year, I got MOR'd against, right? Because I bumped into a piece of airspace over an airfield, and it was one of those where, you know, you're effectively called on the phone and put under caution, and they ask for everything, and it was like, oh my God, I was doing the right thing with the permission of air traffic control. I was discussing it with them. I had two-way comms with them. I said, I'm going to have to descend. It's going to put me inside your ATZ because of cloud, and I'm in a non-IFR certified aircraft. I don't have my instrument rating in the civilian world, and we could die if we go into cloud. That's what everyone gets told. So what would you rather do? Go into cloud and potentially die, or no, it's not the clouds that kill you, by the way, just before people think that clouds are really dangerous and scary.
Yeah, we're not breaking any news about the Earth being flat or clouds being dangerous.
No, that's it. Oh, you want to watch these new clouds? Yeah, but you know, do you do that, or do you do what is right and safe, and you know is safe, and do the right thing and tell people and go down? And I made that decision, and now I'm like, do you know what? I don't even want to go flying anymore.
Of course,
I do, right? But because the system was the experience was horrific, and I, you know, we speak to people every day, and we see people all the time now where it's like, look, I've got my qualifications. You know, in the UK, I've got my qualifications for my drone stuff. I know what I should and shouldn't be doing, but I don't want to go flying because I don't want to do something wrong and get in trouble. And it's like, this is so backwards.
No, exactly.
This is so backwards.
Okay, up next, we're going to talk again another one of the wonderful graphics within this report, and this is talking about the remotely piloted aircraft routine beyond visual line of sight BVLOS operations. And again, you know, it makes okay sense from the point of view that, you know, taking off from city ascent, etc., through around CTA, transitioning through Class G airspaces, and, you know, circumnavigating or cleared through airport CTRs. If the Canadian drone police are watching, that's something you might want to try doing in the future, being a bit controversial there. And then, of course, transiting through and descending, landing in the urban areas, etc., Class G to urban area. And this seems like a much more sensible type of thing from the point of view that obviously it is integrating. But then you think, okay, if we're going to have, or if the plan is to have a far greater a far greater use of the lower airspace, then surely they need to know where all the Mini 3s are and where all the, I would argue not FPV. I think FPV that are being flown below, in almost like this shielded operations style of things, I don't necessarily think you need to know where they are. But surely, the Walmart delivery drone that's dropping off some coffee to somebody is going to need to know if my Mini 3 is flying in the way. Unless it has some kind of see and avoid sensors, is the only thing I can think. So then I start to get back round the full circle to think actually remote ID is coming for all of us, because I can't see solutions where remote ID happens just for the BV loss flights, or for the routine BV loss flights, or for the AAM stuff as well. And yeah, it's one of those nasty circles, and I fear where it will end.
It will come for all of us if we don't get shown the evidence and all of us respond appropriately, right? That is the fundamentals. It will happen unless we don't want it to as a community, and we push back hard enough. It will. But the thing is it a case of the delivery drones or the people in the lower airspace users need to know where we are as small drone or model aircraft operators, or actually do we not all need remote ID, and those things need to have some form of electronic conspicuity on and send it to us? Because me flying around in my Cessna, I don't care where someone is, someone's flying their Mini 3, right? As long as they're below 400 feet. I don't even care if I'm below 400 feet in my Puma or whatever I'm flying, and someone's flying their drone. If they get out of the way,
that's it. Exactly.
Done, right? If they hear me coming and move out of the way, job done. I don't need to know where they are, because if I'm honest, Christ almighty, if you were flying along at low level, well, here's the other thing that a lot of people don't understand as well, who haven't been in this world. I wrote a white paper about electronic conspicuity for the military back in 2011. That went up to the Ministry of Defence, and it went to someone in a position called Joint Capability ISAR 1. And what we discovered was that I was an instructor on the Puma at the time, and we discovered at low level that the mode S, as it was called, which is a form of electronic conspicuity, which gives out kind of certain details about your aircraft. So it can give loads of different things, but in our case, on the aircraft we were flying, it gave people the indicated airspeed we were flying at, the height we were flying at, the heading we were flying, and a couple of other bits about the aircraft, the hex codes, they could identify it and things. And those are the kind of things that show up on the flight radar apps and stuff like that. And we didn't realize that this new kit had been put into our aircraft, and we got this new shiny Mode S, Mode 4 capable transponder in the aircraft that had been installed by the military. And all of a sudden, people could see where we were and where we were flying. And I discovered this because my dad, my late father, was a spotter like I am and was. And he was like, "Oh, I can see your call sign flying around in Northern Ireland." I'm like, "What?" He's like, "Yeah, so you were flying today. You went here, here, and here, and here, and here." I'm like, "What?" And that was how it kind of came out. And we realised that this Mode S was going to be a big deal if we were flying somewhere at the time hot and sandy, and we needed to be able to turn that off. And actually, you could interrogate it from the outside, even when it was switched off, and get it to respond, right? Because that's what it's designed to do in case of hijack and things like that on large aircraft. So we had to find a way to disable it from a military perspective. So, but people don't tend to realise, I think, in a lot of circumstances, that it isn't the silver bullet that people think it is. Having a transponder on your drone, having an RFID, an RID out on your drone isn't a silver bullet for other aircraft operating in the low-level environment. There's so much ghosting and shadowing and reflection, and
very early on in the FAA research and consultations, etc., they spoke to, as they term it, the flight deck, and they were talking to them about UTM, and they were talking to them about drones and the fact that everything will be on one system and that type of thing. And this is obviously a few years ago now, when that was one of the options that was being looked at in terms of everybody being on the same map. And flight deck actually turned around. So your commercial pilots associations, etc., turned around and said, actually, we don't want to see lots of dots of where drones are on the ground when we're flying at 30,000 feet. I don't need to know where someone's Mini 3 is on.
Yeah.
So in actual fact, that was one of the other things, which was a great concept thought up somewhere in an FAA think tank. That again was when it was exposed to the actual experience of people actually doing the job, actually flying in the airspace. It was taken apart. But very much what you're talking about, and I'm not an Altitude Angel salesperson, I promise. Although this system does excite me. This is why things like Project Skyway, which does have government money. So again, it is, as much as we say, look, don't do remote ID, we want government to keep investing in things like this personally, where these BVLOS aircraft, essentially these very large drones, it's those drones that will be told to get out of the way. And I know on the test days, etc., they had helicopters coming across the column and across the test area, etc., and live in real time. Sure enough, these BVLOS drones were diverted to go around the flight path so that they weren't interfering with anything, and that includes, in the middle of that column, you can be flying your Mini 3 and you won't even know that super drone highway even exists, frankly. And I'm sure people will, spot holes. And I certainly wonder how that kind of thing would be scaled when there's lots and lots of BVLOS drones flying in those corridors. And actually then there's a lot more traffic and everyone can't move out of the way, etc. There are issues there, certainly. But to me, that makes more sense because you're not... essentially you're not attacking the current air users for something that may or may not happen, because we still don't know how successful all of these numbers that are put out of there's going to be these 900,000 professional users and XYZ. We don't know if that's going to happen or not yet. And my fear is that we're seeing too much happen in terms of the future flight, which is very exciting, because if it does happen, and it can happen, if we can find a way to coexist, which would be wonderful, then yes, it's going to open up jobs. It's going to open up investment. There is a carbon benefit there as well. So there are huge benefits to it, but it has to be done in the right way. And that's why we are going to be looking at things like the Mozilla research, etc., very, very closely here on Geeksvana. Now, I do actually have some experience with remote ID myself, sat over here in the UK, because we were sent by the very kind people over in Prague, a company called Drone Tag. We were sent one of their Drone Tag products, which is a remote ID module, and this was actually the first remote ID module that was approved for use in the US on the FAA list. And now I stress that this, and you'll see the videos that I've got that I'm preparing for this particular product, you will see that actually where I'm testing it, this is not designed for your FPV drone. This is not designed to be bolted onto your drone that doesn't have standard remote ID in the US already. This is a complex piece of equipment. It's $300, and it's much more used for commercial, so for beyond visual line of sight surveys, that type of thing. It's got all sorts of backup systems. It runs far higher GNSS, etc., far higher standards than is required for remote ID, if that makes sense. They do have a smaller beacon coming out and other things, but I'm also under NDA, but they've all three companies have allowed me to talk about it. I have seen and in some cases in possession of very, very cheap remote ID modules, which will be approved on the FAA list very soon. Which will make it a lot more affordable. So it isn't just the $300 ones, but we've got some good content coming up on that as well. And in fact, on Drone and Sundry, a lot of you will see myself and Bruce Xjet, who's in the chat. We often appear on Gary's show on a Tuesday evening. The owner of Drone Tag is actually going to be joining us, Lucas, to be doing a bit of a Q&A on that whole side of things, which will be interesting to have a remote ID company in the same room as Xjet, which should be fun. But I think one of the things I wanted to stress this evening as well is all of this paperwork that I'm showing you, all of this, etc. You don't necessarily need to be an expert in any of that stuff to have your voice heard. But what you do need to do, which I think is very, very important, and I can't stress this enough, and Matt touched on this earlier, is the importance of public consultations and having our voices heard. And it is so important. I don't make videos on it because I think I'm going to get 100,000 1 million views on there's a UK public consultation on the extension of the legacy. Oh, that'll get me 50,000 views. No, I make those videos because it's important, and actually because we need to tell as many people as possible and have them engaged. And it's really important, isn't it? It's important that we engage with the CAA, engage with the government in these consultations, so we can tell them exactly how we feel and exactly why these things should and sometimes quite often shouldn't be happening.
Yeah, I think, as we've said a number of times on the conversations we've had, particularly over the last couple of months, that is ultimately the way to go about it, right? It's all well and good, me sitting here and other people talking about just saying, well, just don't comply then, because, we do a lot of our policing through consent, and, it's how the CA regulate, right? They regulate through consent. But ultimately, it's about giving you feedback. And I think when this Mozilla consultation, gets to the stage that maybe someone like you uncovers exactly what's going on and where they're at, maybe it's one of those that it's like, okay, cool, this is how you have your input into that process. And bear in mind, the other thing is, it is a long way off, but it's going to come quickly.
And the decisions that are made, and the information those decisions are based on, that's where we need to keep exactly, and that's where we need to keep the tracking, as it were, and see actually our phrases and his recommendations from research carried out by companies who also have clients as drone delivery companies. Are those the ones that end up in the final reports going to government, or that the government uses, etc.? That's where we need to trace these things, and that's where perhaps a bit of accountability will come into it. Tazzy, one of our channel members, and thank you very much again to all of our channel members. You are awesome, supporting the channel in such a direct way, is asking, are there public apps in the US for tracking RFID drones? A genuine question. Yes, there are a couple of the apps. In fact, Drone Tag has one which you can track both the RID signals and the signals that the other signals that their products come off as well. Trying to remember the name of it, but if you look on things like Apple Store and Google Play, you'll find those basically. Tim Long saying they were skydivers, which I think they were, to be honest with you. So it's something that I think we need to be very aware of, and we need to be very engaged with. And we'll do our best here on Geeksvana to bring these stories to you tonight. Hopefully, you've seen a little bit more behind. So rather than just necessarily waving my hands in the air and saying, "Hey, this just isn't right, and we don't want it," I've tried to bring some of the information to light, try to show you the audience how the CAA are thinking in terms of their airspace modernisation. There's a link to that document in the description below, so go and have a look at it if you dare. But we will be here to pull these things apart and to give them a little bit of to air these things basically. Also coming up on the channel, we have got another live stream which is happening on Friday evening, which I'm very, very excited about. Richard Ryan, known as the drone barrister in our circles, he's going to be joining us to follow up on my council versus drones video, which was released yesterday, and he's going to be answering lots of your questions. We're going to be talking about public space protection orders, bylaws, etc., and all of that is going to be covered, and we're going to get his thoughts, and I say opinions, but I don't mean legal opinions, of course, because he won't be giving any actual legal advice, but certainly be sharing his experience and knowledge. And that's from 7 p.m. on Friday, so keep an eye out for the link, which will be going live tomorrow for that show. So I'm really, really looking forward to that one. What have you got coming up on your side of things on the Drone Mentor? It's obviously, you were saying you've got the you're into another of your cycles, but have you got anything exciting coming up?
Yeah, so it's we're almost into the point now where we're starting to launch the YouTube stuff. So that's the big one for us. It's the next live stream, the next live training is next Monday. So there you go. Thank you. Go to dronementor.com/Geeksvana to get into that quickly. And then it's kind of 6 weeks of just running through that and helping everybody learn, build and grow, and then we're into the next Drone Business Secrets course, which goes on.
We've got some fantastic content coming up on the channel, which will include Matt, will include Graham as well, as we build those things up. Geeksvana.news, we've got our first articles up there as well, including a very interesting one. Graham is starting his own 3Cs, because what was it? careless, clueless criminal, which was one of the tags that was put on drone users very famously. And Graham has come up with his own 3 C's for the CAA, and the first one is communications. So if you go to geeksvana.news, and which is our new news portal, you'll be able to read that particular article, which is definitely worth a read, which is where he analyses how the CAA actually communicates with drone users, both the hobby and the professional side of things. It's well worth a look. But yes, there we go. That is the evening's show. Thank you very much for joining us, Matt. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, mate. It's been a pleasure. Thanks, everyone.
We got it to over 100 likes before the show ends, so I really do appreciate that. Anyone watching that hasn't hit the like button, hit the dislike if you really want to, but don't hit the dislike because you don't like Remote ID. At least we are doing the difficult job of bringing you the information. And I'm also quite proud about the fact that I got Matt Williams to talk about drone regulation on air again, which is probably something he didn't think. Yeah, exactly.
Danger. Yeah.
So with all of that said, let's have a blue skies from Matt to end the show.
That's it. Thanks ever so much, everyone. Thanks for having us on, Sean. It's been great to see you all. But until the next time, fly safe